mouth and meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer. Of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to St. John. Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. And when he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test them, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" And Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place. So they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. And when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. Seeing that they were hungry, Jesus needed more than a hunch. In order for all of them to be fed, someone was going to have to share their lunch. About 5 years ago, there was a mother. Her name was Josette, and she had a wonderful little boy whose name was Dylan. And Dylan was going into the 1st grade. And everything seemed to be going well as he entered into school. And every day she would pack his lunch, and she would walk him to the bus stop. She would kiss him and wave goodbye as he got on, and then, he goes off to school. Well, about 4 weeks into this pattern, he asked her a question that really had her concerned. He said, "Mommy, from now on, could you pack me 2 lunches?" Now, she was really worried. Maybe I wasn't giving enough food to my son for him to have for lunch. And he quickly rested her concerns and said, "Oh, it's for this other little boy who I don't think he has much money. He only has a little fruit cup to eat each day." Now, the mother was quite moved by this. And of course, she was more than willing to pack an extra lunch. She would make extra sandwiches, added yogurt, some chips, and off her son went to share with this other little boy. After a few more months, she was contacted by the mother of this other boy. And the mother was greatly moved and weeping and saying how thankful she was, but she wanted to repay her. She wanted to do something and add service, to which the mother said, no, that's not needed. This is simply what I wanted to do for your family. What wonderful expressions of goodwill this story represents. And she put this on her Facebook post that went viral. Social platforms that people were sharing alike, more so than the story itself, but what it generated inside of so many people who could relate to it. There were people on that thread that were saying things like, I know what that's like. I was that little boy. And I am still best friends with the one who brought the extra sandwich for me, or the one who gave me a little extra money. And one even went to say that I was poor for so long and living out of my car that my friend who fed me lunch allowed me to live in his backyard in a tent for a year. And when his father went to work, he was invited to come in and have dinner with him. I mean, the stories were rich and vivid about so many people so touched, so moved, simply by someone sharing a lunch. Sharing food goes back a long ways. National Geographic had a wonderful article called The Joy of Food, and they related an archaeological dig that was near Tel Aviv. No kidding, they say that the site is over 300,000 years old. And there they have evidence to where there's an ancient hearth, like a fireplace that was used to bake goods. And from that, there's evidence that people congregated and shared food with one another. What was it, Mount Vesuvius, when it erupted, the ashes would encapsulate things. Archaeologists found in those ruins this round piece of baked bread, and it had the score marks on it, which is intended for baking and breaking and sharing. So the story and the joy of sharing food goes way, way back in our humanity. It's more than just survival. It's about building relationships. It's about friendships being made and courtships being had and people coming together in meaningful ways. It opens up a rich dialogue to where we find the words of compassion and mercy written all over it. Now, I went and looked up some DIY videos on how to feed 5,000 people. I couldn't find a single one out there. And I can only imagine what that must have been like in those days when Jesus saw 5,000 men, which means there were women and children. Who knows how many thousands of people there were. This is one of the stories that is wonderfully presented to us today in the Gospel according to St. John. And it was interesting. I'm going to have a little sideline note here. Last Sunday, when we read from the Gospel St. Mark, it took the front and the back, but it excised the middle of the story we read out of St. Mark, which was the feeding of the 5,000. So I'm presenting that to you because the evangelist St. John, St. Mark, and also Matthew, they all are relating to this story. So we have what we call a multiple attestation to qualify it and to make it an authentic story. Now, the story, for its own sake, has historicity to it, but it relates to us because we all know what happens when we share with others who are in need. So I couldn't find a DIY video on how to feed 5,000 people. Now, if you're going to see a bunch of hungry people, you need more than a hunch on how they're going to get fed as the host or the hostess. You've got to have a plan. You got to know how much food you need, where you're going to find it, how much is it going to cost. And it's interesting, in the gospel, that was one of the questions that Philip or Andrew had asked him, and that is, it's going to cost us 6 months' wages. What are we going to do with that? How are we going to go to the village and order that much food and which to present to this many people. Now the people were moved by Jesus because they heard of his compassion and his ability to heal people. So the majority of people who came were sick. They could have been sick physically, mentally, spiritually. Whatever the case was, Jesus had compassion on them as he saw this large amount of people coming. Have you been in a crowd of 5,000 people plus before? Have you an idea what? I mean, if you've gone to an athletic event, if you've gone to a theatrical performance or something, I don't think you can put 5,000 people in a theatrical performance. I mean, we're talking about a lot of people, and they're not all coming to this occasion in the best of shape. They're hobbling, they're limping, they're sad, they're depressed. Can you blame the disciples for wanting to send them away and say, Jesus, let's get in a boat and get out of here? They're going to surround us, and then it's going to get really bad fast. And it's going to spread that you're not able to live up to who people think you are, the miracle worker. Now, who steals the show in this, other than Jesus, of course, being the center focal point? But it's right there. It's right there. After he quizzes his disciples on how they were going to get fed, and they were like, there's no way we can do all this. What does it say? Hey, there is this little boy who has 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 fish. Do you think his mother knew what was going to happen for her son to go to this place? Did he need 5 loaves of bread? Did he need 2 fish for his lunch? Or was that being just a good mama who said, I want you to share with those who don't have? There will be countless sermons given on this day from many different pastors who are going to say that the miracle was that Jesus compelled the masses to share out of their abundance and to give. And that's wonderful, because I can tell you, it is a miracle when you see people that give freely to one another. That is a beautiful thing to watch. But I'm going to marry that also with the awesome, miraculous ability of God to create out of nothing. Those baskets travel through in a mystical union of Christ's blessing and breaking of bread. And as it is distributed, did people say, here, I don't need as much as I brought? Did God amazingly and miraculously allow for everything that came out to be replenished inside the basket? He can do that. God is able to do that. Maybe it was a mixture of both. The miracle of God's divinity and God's humanity baked into the bread, into the loaves, into the fish on that occasion. What a miracle. As the people who came ate and they were satisfied. They all sat down on that green grass, which makes us think it was in the spring. And as they were there in the spring, the harvest had not come in yet. So food was probably scarce. And there they were, wanting to be fed. I believe Jesus had more than a hunch that day. I believe he knew that that boy was going to show up and share his lunch. But what the people didn't expect was that God was there. And God showed up for that event to make the miraculous happen. This is a story of giving. And I would be remiss if I don't couple it with the Old Testament, which is an interesting coupling, if you might observe as well. It's the story of another little boy who grew up to become a king. And he knew all about bread. He knew all about giving and sacrificing. But there is also a warning of taking. Woe to those who take because they have so much. The people who came to Jesus were agonizing that so much had been taken from them back from the place that they sought refuge in Jerusalem. They needed salvation. They needed an escape. They needed the miracle of God to present himself to them. That's why they went out to meet Jesus. So much had been taken and overtaxed and removed from their lives. Where was their freedom in God? They came searching for that, to be fed. the freedom to which God gives every human person with dignity, even in the midst of their poverty. Every human being deserves that. And Jesus delivers. Just come to me. So we got this little boy David. He grows up to be a king. He has everything presented to him. He has the kingdom of Israel. He has a wife. I believe he had other wives as well. Why would he take from Uriah the Hittite, his only wife, Bathsheba, and commit the sinful act of adultery? Why would he do that? He had so much. This is where God is giving us a warning sign. The warning to those who have so much that they begin to justify, well, you know what? I've given so much, I deserve a little leeway here, and I need to be treated. Those weren't the type of people that came to the Sea of Galilee seeking to be fed by Christ. Those people will starve. David had consequences to his action. He could not go as far, perhaps, as he thought he could or the people expected him to, because he took from those who had so little. And the prophet Nathan reminded him that he took from the least of these. Jesus had compassion on the thousands of people who showed up because he knew so much had been taken from them. When we come to church, in the breaking of the bread, it is a retelling and a reliving and a real presence to where Christ meets each of us in our depravity and our places to where we feel so much has been lost or taken. And he says, I want to feed you and I want to fill you with good things. He knows your heart. He knows where you've been. And he wants you, he desires for you to come forward and to be fed. And with that, we find this holy community known as the church. We share what we have with one another. And we allow for God to replenish us. So, Jesus sees all of you who are hungry. And trust me, he has so much more than a hunch. For he knows that in order for each of us to be fed on this day, he is more than willing to show you how to share this lunch. In the name of the Father, and the Son,